everybody. Welcome to Product Drive 2022. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Andrea Saez, and today we're going to talk about how to build a minimum lovable product. Before we get started, a little about me first. I'm a speaker and writer. I have over 10 years experience in product management and product marketing, and I just like to ask a lot of questions. I'm also senior product marketing manager at Trent. Cool. So let's get the ball rolling here. Before we get started, I want to very quickly review what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to get started by looking at the MVP and its beginnings. Then we're going to move on to discussing why the MVP failed, look at some tips around how to build lovable products and what that means. And then we'll talk about taking accountability for customer value with a framework called the Product Value Creation Plan, which is something that I have been working on with Right to Left, and I'll introduce you to that towards the end of this talk. Now, before anyone gets angry or triggered by anything I'm about to say, I want everyone to know that to all the MVP lovers out there, I don't actually think the concept of the MVP is a bad one. I think the original intention and concept is actually quite good, but its execution is usually where things go a little bit awry. So let's take a look as to why. The MVP's main focus was to put stuff out quickly and with little to no cost to the team, which in turn resulted in, well, very crappy products, if we're being honest. But that wasn't its original intention. Its original intention was to build a version of a new product which allows a team to collect maximum amount of validated learnings with the least amount of effort. Unfortunately for many, they took the minimum effort a bit too seriously and dropped the validation part and the learning part and replaced it with incomplete, half-baked products that are so poorly constructed that what teams are mostly learning is that they're not actually providing value. In a lot of ways, I understand why this happens. As part of the product team, we are often driven by incomplete strategies, executive whims, having to negotiate with various stakeholders, and even driven by timelines as a prioritization guideline. And this is exactly how the minimum effort maximum learning was lost in the maze that is navigating the product world. And so we end up with something like this, which is, I am sure, not too far-fetched from what we have all experienced at one point or another. Value should have been everyone's number one priority, even in its most minimal form. At the end of the day, the P in MVP stands for product, not prototype. We are not creating prototypes to build on. We are creating products, and those products inherently need to solve a problem and need to provide value. Now, if you ask me, this problem happened because MVP has too loose of a meaning. We love our acronyms, particularly in the product world, but with those acronyms come the opportunity to define things how we want, not necessarily how they are meant. Now that, coupled with all the things that I discussed earlier, is where minimum viable product became minimum product and viability was almost entirely lost. And if you think this wouldn't happen today with everything that we know about MVPs and working with outcomes, please remember that Juicero only happened a couple of years ago. Now, this is probably the one product I love to hate the most in the world because it highlights that MVP is not just about usability, but it is really about value to the customer. If you're not familiar with the story, it was a machine that squeezed out pre-packaged juice. That's literally all it did. And it actually retailed at $6.99. Someone out there in the world, other than Kim Kardashian, thought that $700 was worth paying for something that you could literally just do with your own two hands. And of course, as people started realizing that there was no value to the machine itself, the company went out of business. So let's talk about lovability. Well, the MVP focuses on validation, the MLP focuses on lovability. This means that the experience provided by the product or feature is not just functional, but it is the beginning to providing an even better experience in the future. MLP means you're not sacrificing design and experience for scope, and you're putting the user's desired outcome above hitting deadlines for the sake of it. It means that while you have designed a unicorn, you're not entirely taking away its magic as you're building its foundations. When it comes to the MLP, there's a few key points to always remember. These things can set you on the path to success on both your initial launch as well as with continuous learning, all while keeping customer value at the forefront. If you're in product, some of these things may sound very familiar, but I think it's important for us to have a refresher and just always keep these things in mind. So we're going to talk about these things next. Problems versus solutions, your product vision, measuring success, delighters, user experience, and of course, your competition. So the first point is around solving problems and understanding the what and the why, which I like to refer to as the absolute golden rule in product management. So the first three questions that I always like to ask when somebody comes up with a new idea are, what problem are we trying to solve? Why? And who are we solving this problem for? Without a clear purpose, it's likely that the idea might flop and you'll end up spending time, money, resources, capacity, all these things, end up building tech debt for something that nobody really wanted in the first place. I really like this quote by Abby Agrawal on MVPs, which touches on what I've just said, because gaining clarity on the basics is absolutely essential. Let's go on to point number 2, remembering your product vision. There's a story that I like to tell when it comes to product vision, which is when I lived in Montreal, I lived near this coffee shop that served coffee, breakfast, lunch, dinner. At night, it turned into a jazz bar with fancy cocktail, drinks, and music. And it was, on the surface, fantastic. And then they also had this little retro shop in the back. Now, in Europe, this might sound very common, but at the time, it was actually a pretty new concept in Canada. And like I said, they try to do all of it at the same time. Unfortunately, they didn't do any of it right, starting with the coffee. The coffee was actually absolutely terrible, and they were a coffee shop. Their focus was absolutely all over the place. And within a year of opening, it shut its doors. Building products can be a lot like that. I grabbed this quote that you see on the screen from the head of product at Amazon Music, which really resonated when we were talking about MVPs. Build features well, and don't build too many incomplete features. Otherwise, you may also end up being the product that tries to do everything at once and doesn't do any of it well. A product vision can help you cut through the noise of decision-making and keep your team focused. The third point is about measuring success. To understand if something gives you the desired outcome you're looking for, you have to set a measurement of success. This will let you know how your work is impacting those key results that you set. Without a baseline, how will you know if your work is actually making a difference? Understanding what and why is crucial, but understanding how a potential opportunity will help you move the needle will allow you to prioritize based on the potential impact and even help you reproduce that success again later. The quote on the screen here is by Christina Watkin. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right and I'm not butchering it. As she is the author of Radical Focus, and I highly recommend that book if you're learning to learn more about achieving goals and OKRs. Now, the fourth point here is on delighters, and I do want to tread on this one lightly because it's one of those it depends moments in product management. A delighter can still be a great addition that should be included within the scope of what you're looking to build as part of the MVP, as long as those delighters link back to the problem that you're trying to solve. So one of my favorite delighters in any app that I use is by Asana, and it's the completion unicorn that you see on the screen. If you're not familiar with it, when you complete a task, a unicorn flies across the screen to celebrate your success. It is the silliest thing to add, but it has such a delightful impact on that user experience. Do I love it? Absolutely. Would I have included it as part of my MLP? Probably not on the first version. It's important to balance delighters with effort. If it distracts from implementing the core usability and value of the feature or product, then maybe it's not the time just yet. Our fifth point is about user experience, and I actually want to divide this into 3 parts. The first part is about presenting benefits. If there's any one thing that I've learned in my career is how you present something makes a huge difference. Customers don't care about the thing that you have built. They care about how the thing that you have built actually solves their problem. I want to quote my friend John Fontenot here. He's the author of a book called Never Assume. It's fantastic. You should read it. When he told me, we were discussing about MVPs, and he said, almost to the T, customers don't care about your tech stack if it doesn't solve their problem. It's important to validate their problem and then validate the solution. Now, this is very on the positioning side of things. So you have to ensure that you're working with your product marketing team to make sure you're talking about why this is the best solution out there. You have to drive home that message that your product is the best product for whatever outcomes your customers are trying to reach. The second part is UX copy. This one might hurt the fellow copywriters out there, but I once heard someone tell me directly, anyone can write copy. It's not worth spending time on. Of course, that felt like somebody had grabbed a knife and driven it into my chest. And of course, I'm going to hard disagree with that statement. Writing copy should be part of your design process. And if anything, can be considered even part of those delighters that I mentioned previously. In order to write really good UX copy, you need to understand the entire process from beginning to end about what users are looking to do and why. This might include things like what led the user to interact with a particular function. What is the expected interaction? And what is the expected outcome of that interaction? So if you have a UX copywriter, involve them in the process and make sure to thank them, because writing copy is not easy and not everybody can do it. The last point here is around education and discoverability. Now picture this, if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, did it really fall? Now let's apply that to your product. If a feature is released and nobody knows about it, what was the point? Make sure that upon releasing something new, you also have onboarding and education covered. Present the benefits again. So we go back to the previous point. Present the benefits of why people want this, guide them through how to use it, and provide additional documentation or guidance when needed. It's important to remember that onboarding is a continuous process. It's not just a one-time thing. It's important to develop a product adoption strategy that ensures discoverability and ongoing education for your users. The sixth and last point is about competitors. Now, I don't want to confuse anyone here. Being aware of what your competitors are doing is different than being distracted by what they are doing. Don't let your competitors derail you. Timing is as important as building things properly. I have seen too many companies rush to market just because someone else did something, and they jump through hoops trying to put out something similar just to have a leverage point against the competitor. That's not how it works. Solving a problem well and with the right discovery, research, and understanding of who your target audience is can help you get the differentiator. It's not just about who did it first. I really love this quote on the screen by one of the product managers at LaunchDarkly. And who would know better about launching features better than those that help us launch them in the first place? With an MVP, you are given the opportunity to present something outside the box, something that could potentially be a huge differentiator for your product. Now think about all the things that we've discussed so far. We've talked about solving problems, delighting users, and how to present things. Don't do these things because you think others have done so already, but because there's an opportunity for you to actually do something different. So now that we wrapped up this section, I do want to touch on what is probably the most important part of the MLP, and that's the actual lovability behind it. As I said in the beginning, lovability is about user value. So how do we understand user value? I want to introduce to you the Product Value Creation Plan, or the Product VCP for short. This is a framework that I've been working on and was put together by Dave Martin at the company Right to Left. It is a framework that serves as a way to tie together your product strategy, objectives, and your roadmap with a unique focus on customer value. While your product strategy focuses on what and how, that is, what your strategy looks like and what problems you're solving, and to an extension, how you might provide those solutions to your customers, the product VCP highlights your customers' needs. And that includes things like, who you are solving problems for, including use cases and personas, why this is important to the customer, what experiences you want to provide for your customers, and how do we influence new and better behaviors. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, how is this any different than a product strategy? So I want to take a minute to review that properly. I don't want to be prescriptive with what a strategy looks like or, provide a specific template to use, but at a high level, your product strategy should focus on the following areas. The first is what you want to achieve, and that's your product vision, your business models, and your positioning. Your customers and market landscape, and that's going to include your personas and competitors, and of course, how you're going to achieve the things that you want to achieve, and that might be your goals, your OKRs, your initiatives. Now, this looks fairly comprehensive, but there's a few unanswered questions here. The most important being one, how do we know that these things are actually providing value to the customer? Adding focus to customer value actually helps us deliver on business objectives. By focusing on customer value, we build better solutions, we have higher adoption, and have higher impact on goals. In doing that, it means we've got to really understand where customer value and assumptions intersect with our business goals. It's these value assumptions that unfortunately regularly go undiscussed, are not defined, or are missing entirely from the product strategy. We need to validate those assumptions and gather as much evidence as possible to proceed with a particular direction. And in turn, that is what helps us build MLPs with the highest impact and lovability. Now, I could sit here and talk to you about the VCP for the next hour, but in the interest of time, I'll go over it very quickly and mention the 4 pillars that make up the VCP. The first is target audience, and this enables teams to understand customers and their use cases. The next is the Customer Value Explorer, and this helps us in understanding the user behaviors that create value for customers. Next is the Value Assumption Builder, and this helps leaders articulate how product impacts value and creates better habits for our users. And then there's a PVC tracker, which actually enables us to track the impact of the things that we're doing on those behaviors that we want to modify. So earlier we talked about measuring success. That last bit on the PVC tracker is connected to that. At the end of the day, our products will enable or prevent certain behaviors. So we need to be very clear about identifying that modification of behaviors so that we can provide value to the user. The last point I want to outline here when looking at the MVP or the MLP or whatever acronym we want to use is gather the data and look at the evidence first. What evidence do you have for solving a problem? What value assumptions are you going to research? How do you measure success? How do you balance those delighters? That all comes down to evidence. Now, obviously, MEBP doesn't quite roll off the tongue, right? Minimum evidence-based product, it's a bit of a mouthful. And MVP has unfortunately gained a reputation for being cheap and quick and dirty, which, can put us in very tough positions. So I'm going to go for a minimum loved product to really drive the message that products that are loved are those that truly provide value at the end of the day. We're always going to have to negotiate, so it's not going to be easy. And we may even have to sacrifice certain things, but value should never be one of those things that we sacrifice. That's it for me today. If you want to chat about anything that I've talked about, including the product VCP, let me know. We can connect on Twitter at Andrea Saez, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Thank you very much for attending, and I hope to hear from you soon.